Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. I am thrilled to speak to our guest today. She is a multi-talented and multifaceted artist, paving the way for change in every field that she inhabits. She is New York City Ballet's first Asian American female soloist ever to be promoted to an upper tier, and she considers herself the complete antithesis of the stereotypical ballet dancer. She has styled herself as the rogue ballerina as a means of embracing the qualities that make her stick out as a dancer, such as her body type and ethnicity. I can't wait to dive into today's conversation, so please join me in welcoming Georgina Pazcoguin to The Conscious Artist. Georgina, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. Right off from the start, I absolutely love the name, The Rogue Ballerina. Please tell us more about the story behind this.
The rogue ballerina. Well, it is my moniker that I have just embraced over the many years of soul searching and trying to find my place in this white Eurocentric art form of ballet, and being mixed race, Filipina, Italian, and just being told that you don't fit this ideal of what a balanchine ballerina looks like. And I've always questioned what exactly that means. And so, in terms of things, things that I can't change, and I can't change the makeup of my DNA, I can't change the way my face looks with stage makeup on, with my features highlighted. And so, in an act of defiance and radical self-love, I started to embrace these attributes that were being highlighted as something that is negative, and in my mind, spinning the connotation around, which is why I love the word rogue. It's also spinning the connotation of the word rogue around too into this beautiful, positive metaphor that, being different is what sets me apart and has set me apart throughout my career at New York City Ballet, which I'm super proud to say has come to its fruition as of May 7th. And and I continue on. I am the rogue ballerina in all of my endeavors post New York City Ballet. So it's really just my flag of pride, just embracing who I am in this mixed mess of a human.
Wow, I love this so much. Thank you for sharing this with us. And I have to say, I really love the way you've taken what could have been a catalyst for
trauma.
I guess that's a more direct way to say it. Essentially trauma, instead taking it and turning it around to create something beautiful for yourself. And it's so interesting because while we speak a lot in the classical music world, especially today, about diversity and how, for example, I'm Indian American. There aren't a lot of South Asians in Indian classical music, or there haven't been a lot as I was growing up. And, I can count the number of South Asian colleagues I know on both hands maximum. And in the younger generations now, there are so many coming out into the music world, studying in music conservatories. Of course, the conversation about Black and Latino communities being more prevalent in the classical music world, having more access, more possibilities. This is a conversation that's happening nowadays especially in the last couple years, I would say, right?
Right.
But I don't ever think about, oh, well, I'm not what a pianist should look like. That thought has never crossed my mind. And so listening to you say this is actually kind of shocking for me to even realize that that's something that's actually very prevalent in your field.
Yeah, in my field, in the acting sphere, in the Broadway sphere, because, it's not that music isn't a visual art form. It very much is. Going to the Philharmonic is one of my favorite experiences. But especially when it comes to being on stage as a physical embodiment of music. Music and dance, specifically ballet, are so tied together. And it's been an interesting journey, kind of finding and holding space in that way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's definitely an eye opener for me and a very big point. And I actually thought about this recently. It's so funny you brought this up. I was just recently realizing that I prefer phone calls to video calls, especially with people that I don't know well, because I'm much more attuned to hearing rather than seeing. Because as a pianist, what I'm most focused on is sound production, not visual production. And I think that's why I have a podcast and not a YouTube channel. So, but it's really interesting that you said that, because it is true. Like, while yes, we are on stage physically, and sure, we maybe shouldn't show up in our sweatpants, because there is a level of respect that I think we can have and should have for what we're doing, the art that we're presenting, just wanting to put our best foot forward in a way. But at the end of the day, nobody's really coming to see what we look like. I mean, hopefully they're coming to hear what music we're sharing. Whereas in your field, in the acting world, in Broadway, people are also coming to see what you look like.
Right. I mean, when you think about a ballerina, like, what is ballerina to you offhand?
I mean, for me, it's a beautiful but visual art form.
Right. And who embodies that? I think throughout this 400 years that this art form has existed, it's not this Filipina face that you imagine as being a ballerina. You think, in a lot of my experience, maybe one thinks of, like Black Swan, that movie. I think a lot of people who have either seen that, but that was like, those were mostly white faces.
Yeah. I think maybe for me, being a brown person, like, I'm not even looking at the face. You know what I mean? Like, that
Hmm.
it doesn't matter to me what the face looks like and what color somebody's skin is, because I'm brown. So I literally don't pay attention to that, and I couldn't care less. But it's the same thing with music. I want to be moved.
Right.
And for me, that's what it should be. So I am truly sorry that you've even had to experience that.
Well, thank you for acknowledging that. But like, it's so refreshing to speak with someone who just intrinsically gets it, you know?
Well, I guess with minority comes solidarity. Well, speaking of minority, I think something that is very important to talk about is what I really want to chat with you today about, which is sort of the fluctuating hormones that female artists have to deal with each month. And that's the best case scenario with a regular cycle, that it's just once a month for a couple days. As musicians, it affects us heavily, of course, with our strength capacity, with our confidence, with our mental stability. But I cannot even imagine the impact of fluctuating hormones on dancers. As artists, we're athletes. But again, that's much more so for dancers. Ensuring that our bodies are in optimal health takes a lot of discipline. And on top of that, there's the stereotype that ballet dancers must look a certain way. And in my opinion, too thin. But to dance and to perform, you need energy, which comes from a good and healthy diet. And a lot of what we eat or don't eat can also directly affect our hormones, especially during menstruation. So I'm really curious to know, just to start off this conversation, what has been your experience in dealing with your monthly cycle and how it affects your body, especially during performances?
Well, this has been a long and still current journey for me to reconnect with my body. You're so right. The ballet body type, in a sense, and although the world is embracing so many different body types now, when I first started my career, it was very much the idea, especially to be in New York City Ballet, was to have this super impossibly waif thin aesthetic, this like ectomorph sort of body type. And that is not what I am at my most optimal expression of body. Like, I am quite muscular. I'm super strong. I'm also like, I'm not saying that I'm like this like huge person. Like, I do fit into this ballet type, but it was a struggle for me, looking at other dancers who really did fit this, like 5'11", like super skinny, like 00, and then to get a professional job at the age of 17. And I was a very late bloomer. I did not even get my first menstruation until 17. And that, I believe, was due to the fact that I was so extremely active as an athlete, as a young dancer.
Wow.
So I think that also like delayed, I suffered a lot from stress fractures. And like my baby sister, I'm one of six children. My baby sister, she got her period before me, and that was like super embarrassing for me. And it's because I felt like stuck in this suspended state of being this like little girl. And it's something that I fight against in talking about what's accepted in the ballet world, because you can very much slip into this idea that these women, these ballerinas, have this body type, and what is line and aesthetic when you come to visually seeing the art form of ballet expressed on stage, but also like what is detrimental in seeing women my age who are like 38, 40, who still look like prepubescent teenagers.
Right.
That's like really messed up when you think about it. So, and unpacking my journey, like I've never had a normal cycle. And part of that was due to, like I did suffer from disordered eating. I wrote a book called Swan Dive, and I talk about this. And I moved to New York to study with School of American Ballet the fall of 2001. And not only is like entering like a boarding school, like ballet is already intensive, it's sort of art form. And then to move away from home and then a week later have 9/11 happen, my whole system was like, ah. So that also threw me off cycle wise. And then just, having this like extremely active lifestyle, I feel like every body is different, especially when it comes to sorting this out. But for me, I eventually had to go on to birth control to kind of regulate my cycle. And then that process of finding like which hormones would work. And then eventually, like I was on birth control from the age of like 19 to 36. That's a long time. And
Wow.
like
Yeah.
we could talk for ages. There's not been any true research as to how birth control affects women, because most of medical studies aren't done on women,
Right.
speaking of minorities. So it's like I came to this realization, and then also through the process of, I created a diversity initiative through my own growth as a person, exploring the hormones and, anxiety. I am someone that suffers from anxiety as well. It came to a point where birth control was no longer serving me. So I am no longer on hormonal birth control. And for the first time ever in my life, I have the copper IUD. That was a choice. And I have a regular cycle for the first time ever.
Wow.
And it's not easy. I can't say that it's easy, because all of a sudden, like I spent so many decades, just not even having a period because I was on such a low progesterone dosage. And then just doubled up with, so it was like really hard for me to monitor what should be happening in my body.
Right.
And so now that I like track on a calendar, when I'm feeling like I'm about to rage at someone, or if I feel like the small things are ticking me into this like emotional state, or the anxiety super high, I now have this calendar that I can flip to and be like, okay, where exactly am I in cycle? And not making light of the external factors that we as women face every day. And I don't like the saying like, oh, you must be on your period. That's like bullshit. We women experience so much that we have to put up with regarding the patriarchy. But then on top of this, we do have these hormones that fluctuate and make things seem like the end of the world. And most of the time, when I am feeling like there's a problem that I cannot solve, I'm able to give myself some grace because I have this scientific catalog of where I am, and my body's just doing something else on top of being a ballerina, being a producer, leading a diversity initiative. Like on top of that, my body is producing an egg to may or may not be fertilized. And that's a huge endeavor, and it takes so much energy. And yeah, like in terms of like training, like there's some days where I'd like come home and just not be able to recover and like finding myself needing so much more food. Like I already need more food than a normal human that might work at a desk, but to then have to calibrate that on top of. And then if I'm at a certain point in my cycle, and at New York City Ballet, we have the bouncing ballets that aren't story related. So we call them the bouncing black and white ballets because you wear a leotard and tights on stage. Those were always the worst and adds like so much more anxiety because I'm also a person that in my premenstrual cycle I water retain, and it has nothing to do about weight, just in like I am so used to seeing my body, and so are other people within a company. I'm talking 2, 3, 5 pounds. I know that people can fluctuate even more. Like that's noticeable in this hyper body oriented space. And just to clarify, for those who might not know what my job entails, I was in a rehearsal space in which I'm staring at myself in a mirror all day long. And also just like your coworkers, like you get to know, like I could know someone walking down the street and not see their face by the gait of their walk. Like that's how in tune
Wow.
we are with each other. So I'm thinking about times like I had a job that you would get fat talks. And that was a very interesting thing to be 17 and to be at a certain part of your cycle and then to be pulled aside being like, you're not looking your best. And I'm like, well, it's because like I didn't have the wherewithal or the gumption to be like, give me a week. I'm going to reset here. This is not because like I've gone out and had like a giant meal. This is my body's way of doing what it was born to do.
Oh my goodness.
It seems almost like hyper reality to like have a job that structures around so much visibility of body, and then to talk about, and I don't think there are a lot of people talking about menstruation and its impact on female ballerinas' bodies.
I don't think so. So thank you for being willing to talk about this.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we should have some grace. The ballet world is changing, and I know, like in some of the forums that we had, this has come up, and I'm so happy that other strong, courageous women are speaking about their stories and their experiences. And another thing to keep in mind, and you might want to fact check this, is that at a certain point in a cycle, because of the demands on the body, you are also more injury prone. Do you experience that too? I assume that this is with women across the board. It really became essential for me to be like, if I'm taking ballet class, we have this point in ballet class. It's called like Grand Allegro. And you basically launch yourself up into the air. And we do big split jumps and tourgetés, and we're traveling across the floor. And there is scientifically a certain point where women are more injury prone, especially tendon injuries, ligament injuries at certain points in their cycle.
Oh my goodness. Okay, there's so much to unpack here. So, first of all, I just want to say one thing because I actually had another episode a few weeks ago, essentially about the patriarchy and feminism and taking our power back. And I spoke with a wonderful mezzo soprano. And just for any non female listeners that are out there, I just want to say that when we talk about the patriarchy and what we women face on a daily basis, we're in no ways trying to sit and bash anyone that has not experienced what we're experiencing or what we have experienced, but rather we're asking for grace and compassion and open mindedness to hear and recognize that there could be a perspective and an experience, a reality of someone that doesn't exist for someone else, and that doesn't make it less real. And so, for example, while male athletes or male dancers or male musicians could potentially also be tired one day, could potentially also be exhausted from traveling and jet lag and arrive right before the concert or right before the show. The things that women have to deal with in our bodies, especially, and actually I was going to say especially during our period, but that's actually not true because we are constantly in a menstruation cycle.
Mm-hmm.
We're in constant menstruation cycle phases. There are 4 main phases, and the 2 big main phases result with the period and the ovulation process, and then basically the body preparing for pregnancy. And if it doesn't happen, then it goes back to the period. And so we are constantly in this cycle. Well, up until we go through menopause. But the point is
Right.
for a large chunk of our lives. And whether you're on birth control or not, which I want to talk more about, but whether we're on birth control or not, our body is still trying to experience that natural phase. Things like birth control, hormonal birth control, is suppressing that. But then that leads to other hormonal fluctuations, which include anxiety and depression and things like that. So I want to talk more about that. But I wanted to share something that my therapist told me. This was 3 years ago. And I wrote it down because it was so powerful. So I'm going to read this quote. It's not a direct quote, it's my own summary of what she said. The time of menstruation is the time of most empowerment for women. It is the moment our bodies are gearing up to produce a child. We can be at our highest in that moment, but millennia of conscious and subconscious messaging that women during menstruation should be shunned or are weak has taught us to deflate instead of rising. We deflate so the man can come take care of us for their ego. And because we have all that energy and empowerment and nowhere to direct it, we release it in other ways by becoming quote unquote neurotic or emotionally unstable, as seen from the outside. But if we as women change our mindset and remember that menstruation is a powerful thing, that a woman during menstruation is a goddess warrior, we can remind ourselves that we have that power within. And I just loved that reframe because I remember I was talking to my therapist and telling her that, I'm experiencing this and that. And yes, I'm on my period and it's probably because of that. And she was like, hold on, wait a second. And so I really love this reframing. I really love this chance to remember that our bodies have literally been made to continue the human species.
Yeah, they are they are the giver of life in a lot of ways, like they are temples that channel life out into the world, quite literally.
And the amount of honestly trauma and pain that we can endure as women, like frankly, I don't think men would be able to handle childbirth, like the amount of pain.
Right.
Or even periods. We know like with period simulators, when guys try that, a lot of them cannot handle the pain. And we're going about our daily activities dealing with this crippling pain, sometimes having to go on stage to perform. So back to birth control though, because this is a very important point that perhaps because of this, I'm curious to know, do a lot of dancers decide to go on the pill in order to stop bleeding each month because of the effects it can have on the body during performance?
I can't speak for other dancers. I can only speak from my own experience. I don't think that has ever been the reason to take.
Okay.
That just happened to be like the side effect of the birth control that I was on that was best for me, was that I ended up not having a period at all. And that doesn't mean that I didn't have the other symptoms. I just did not bleed.
Exactly.
And no, I don't think that birth control in its own right has it. Like, I remember going on it and having this like anxiety about like, okay, so how much weight am I going to gain and how is this going to change my body and everyone's going to know. And those are very real circumstances. I mean, especially, just like my experience with getting the copper IUD was honestly not the best. But that's also having something that is foreign placed into your body that like also had a wild sort of effect on bloating until my body got used to it. Speaking of like hormone fluctuations, I went through the process of freezing my eggs during a cycle.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So on top of everything else.
Yeah, over the past year and a half, I made that decision. And that also like circles back into this idea of not excluding men, but women have a very clear timeline, that the childbirthing years.
Yeah.
And it is my decision not to have children right now. That doesn't mean I don't want to not have them. And we have the scientific ability, and I, thank God, have the privilege to be able to have saved enough money to be able to, because this is obviously not covered by insurance or anything. That was insane because you're shooting yourself up with this like fake estrogen and like you're in like the best mood ever. And then your follicles, they just enlarge and enlarge and enlarge. And I was still taking class. I had a very slow season in which I decided, I basically waited as long as I could wait, and I saw a window where it's like my cycle timed up and I wasn't dancing. I think I was understudying something. So it's like there's a possibility I could get thrown on, but I was pretty confident that that wouldn't happen. But just like I could physically, and this is like something that like really cued me into like this goddess like power, the amazingness of the human body just in general, its ability to accept, regenerate, but also like produce. There are a lot of hormones, and I could feel like my lower half just like expanding, expanding, expanding over this 12-day cycle of hormones that I was injecting into myself to not only make myself produce one egg, but produce as many eggs as possible to be harvested. And so there I was working with the PT there and very discreetly let them know I didn't want this to be public knowledge. And of course, like I'm wearing like sweatpants over, like I'm not in a leotard and tights, because not only do I feel just so heavy, not in the sense of like looking in the mirror and seeing heavy. No, it was just like I physically felt weighed down by this enlargement of what was going on physically inside of me. And that was just wild. And also the process of like after the procedure, taking great care to I had a great lymphatic drainage practitioner to get all of that extra estrogen out, because that's also not great to have in one's body. And the respect that I have for my instrument to let me train for as long as I did. I think I danced up until like day 8. And then it really it became apparent that like, no, I'm not going to jump. Like, yeah, I could feel it. Like I can feel it in my body. And like the best thing that I can tell women is to trust your intuition, trust your instinct. It has never steered me wrong. So I promise you that it is likely not to steer you wrong. It was like this act of truly listening, because like at one point the practitioner was like, you really can't dance because you're so enlarged that you could flip your uterus and that could be super dangerous and this and that.
God.
And so like they tell you all the scary stories, and I was like, it's unlikely that I'm gonna do that. But like there was a point where I was like, oh, okay, I have to stop, and this is fine and everything's gonna be fine. But yeah, just to navigate that whole process was really eye-opening and connected me with myself, even though that wasn't a completely natural process. But it was a great learning experience. And also, like, I feel so much lighter having done that and having the procedure be successful, like beyond age 35, they're calling you like a geriatric pregnancy,
I
which is
know, right?
ridiculous. One of the funniest stories is that when I came to after the procedure, they were like, wow, this was like really successful. I was able to like freeze like a ridiculous amount of eggs. And I guess with like still being kind of like under this like anesthesia, I guess I fired back to the nurse, but like, who's geriatric now? Without missing a beat. And then like after like my recovery, they were like, do you know what you said? And I was like, no clue, but I know I'm a little bit of a liability. But yeah, it is such an important thing to understand as a woman, to get in touch with your cycle, to get in touch with yourself. And especially as a dancer and as an artist, it can inform so much of your day to day. I mean, this past week, I've been super walloped by this particular cycle. And, like you had mentioned earlier in the podcast about how things that you eat, things, stress, all these things, they influence the symptoms of your period. And, I've gone through a really wild time in which, like I've let go of something that is so dear to me, stepping away, having my last performance on the David A. Koch Theater stage, May 7th. And then trying to grapple with all that, that's a lot of stress. And then I'm also like redefining for myself what my daily practice with ballet is. And so that's also been influenced in that, and kind of going through this grief process, because, you don't let go of 20 years of like a super intense schedule, a schedule at which we only got 48 hours notice of a rehearsal. And now all of a sudden having agency, not just over my body, but like I can plan into months in advance now because I have agency over my schedule. It's such a wild process. And so like this time around, this cycle, I was really starting to feel the exhaustion of everything that I'd held together just to get through and be present on that final show. Does that make any sense?
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, first of all, I want to say a huge congratulations
Oh, thank you.
for your final show and for this new chapter, not only in your professional life, but also in your personal life, like taking control of your body and your life and your choices.
Mm-hmm.
Really, kudos. Incredible. So I really can truly understand. And I love the way you said you felt so much lighter after going through the process of freezing your eggs and having it be successful, because I can imagine it was also this kind of like societal pressure lifted because you no longer have to worry about your body being too old.
Right. And also just like pressure to be in a relationship. No, it's like no, like I'm in a relationship with myself right now because I need to be, because I've been in this super adversarial space, not just being, like a woman of color in the ballet world, but being in the space of being a ballerina and fighting against a body type perspective and holding space as my own, and accepting myself, and now just releasing myself of that which has been ingrained since the age of what, like 4, these body types and standards that are ingrained in us from the very first time we look at like pictures of women on magazines. I'm using my grace in a different way now, and I'm flexing that in a different way, and it feels very powerful. That's not to say that it's not stressful. Like I mentioned to you that we're about to have first preview of Here Lies Love, which kind of feeds into like this my whole diversity initiative that I've started. It's the first Filipino musical, first immersive experience in Broadway. And so, like, I am feeling their adrenaline. And so it's kind of spurring me into this, oh, I feel like my body thinks I'm going to perform, but I'm actually not. But I'm so invested. So it's like, it's so weird how being around performers can influence a woman's body. And also in the dance world, that I should mention is kind of like an interesting point, that is like at some point, all of the women end up cycling on together.
Of course. Yes.
Right.
I was literally going to say that.
Right? It's really wild that how that happens. And I don't understand the science of it. I mean, I'm sure at some point you'll have some sort of brainy person on that can explain that to the public. It's not me.
I'll need to get an expert on for sure. It's not me either. But I wanted to go back to something you said earlier, which was about putting something foreign in your body when you were talking about your IUD. And this actually brings me back to a memory. When I was a teenager, I had really bad acne, and I tried every over-the-counter, like topical, prescription, medicine, like everything possible. And I finally was prescribed Roaccutane, which, as we know, is like one of the strongest medications you can take for acne, and is, I really hope, not prescribed too much anymore because it is really not good. But I remember how badly my hormones were affected by the Roaccutane.
Oof.
For the first time in my life, for a period of about 4 or 5 months, I would say, I didn't really care about piano.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear this.
Yeah. And I mean, I was practicing, I was doing stuff. I just didn't care.
Yeah.
I was kind of like flat. Everything was flat.
Yeah.
And I remember my mom being like terrified about what was happening because I started playing when I was 3. I decided to become a concert pianist when I was 10. There has not been a day in my life that I did not want to be a concert pianist.
Mm-hmm.
Since I made that decision. Of course, that doesn't mean I love to practice every single day, but I cannot live without music. And there was a period when I was a teenager of these 4 to 5 months where I literally couldn't care less. And I remember how scary it was when I realized one day how apathetic I was to like everything, just everything in life, and especially the thing that I was most passionate about. Luckily, my acne did clear up. I got off the medicine, and it was like I was born again.
Right.
And I don't remember a huge amount from my teenage years or college or most of my life, but I remember that. I remember that feeling of like kind of like waking up, and I realized post this whole situation that I was probably in some sort of depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a teenager and I didn't even realize it. We don't even acknowledge how much of an effect birth control or any kind of medication or any kind of, for example, foreign devices in our body, especially hormonal related, can affect how we feel and can affect how we see the world and how we feel about anything that we have.
Yeah.
We're so passionate about our art, and then all of a sudden we do something for whatever, whether it's a personal choice, whether it's a necessary choice, whether it's a medical choice, and how much it can affect us. And of course, this doesn't only affect women, but our hormones have such a greater fluctuation that ultimately I do feel like a lot of choices that we have to make as women end up being honestly very scary ones sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So I want to talk a little bit about the menstrual cycle and the 4 phases. So just for a little bit of scientific background, we have the first phase, which is menstruation, which is commonly known as the period. We have the second phase, which is the follicular phase, which starts on the first day of our period and lasts about 13 to 14 days, ending in ovulation. We have the ovulation phase where a mature egg is released from the ovary and moves along the fallopian tube towards the uterus. And then we have the luteal phase, which happens after ovulation, where the cells in the ovary release progesterone and a small amount of estrogen. And this is when the lining of the uterus starts to thicken in preparation for pregnancy. And if pregnancy doesn't occur, then progesterone levels drop and the uterus lining sheds and the period begins again. And I want to talk a little bit about the menstrual cycle and how it impacts exercise and athletic training. Because again, as a dancer, you are an athlete. As a musician, to a certain extent, I'm also an athlete. And so from what I've learned, from what I've researched, from what I've tried to understand for myself, there are 2 main phases of our menstrual cycle, right? You have like the follicular phase and you have the luteal phase. And essentially like the follicular phase happens during the first part of our cycle and the luteal phase happens during the second part. And there's a lot of research about athletic performance during the follicular phase. Apparently, we have lower levels of hormones during this first phase of our menstrual cycle. And so our body is actually primed to maximize like hard training efforts, meaning we store carbohydrates better. And it's an ideal time for high intensity training.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with you, if you have noticed a difference in your dance performance and in the way you feel physically in the first part of your cycle, meaning from the beginning of your period lasting about 2 weeks or so. And if you feel that time having more energy, essentially it's apparently an easier time to build and maintain muscle. And we apparently also are like our body temperatures are cooler and more regulated. Of course, we need more iron at that time because we're losing blood. So, there are different foods recommended. But I'm curious to know, like, have you felt a difference in that period of your cycle?
Yes, I have experimented with different sorts of like intensive, like it's mostly cross training, just because ballet is so anaerobic anyway. Like I said, there are other external factors. I mean, like no one really like I don't really love to be in a leotard and tights when I'm bleeding from the crotch, but I do find that my recovery is easier during the first part of a cycle. But I will say that my energy level, like I'm on like day 3 right now of cycle, and my energy is still ticking back upwards. So it's like I've had to modify my training this week just because of how exhausted I felt last week moving into this.
Yeah.
However, I do think that in the work that I have done, and I'm trying to think back to this past month that I was like really intensively preparing for this final show, which had all sorts of extra stakes on it. My training was geared towards cycle and not just for this end show date. And I do think that was like hugely helpful, and also like understanding that there's in any process of artistic expression, you have like this hill upwards, so you're really excited and then you like plateau. And then there's always that valley before you finally hit the performance. I'm sure you've experienced this in your own way preparing for a concert. But then there's also like to kind of even them out as to like where energy levels are. I find that to be a much more productive way to rehearse.
Hmm.
My rep at the company was super super demanding. So it was really important for me to be able to acknowledge where my deficits were in terms of energy and muscle capacity, and then like find ways through the various practitioners that I had access to, and acknowledging that not everyone has access to these amazing individuals, to kind of gear and retweak what I might have done differently just in normal prep without knowing, without having this like knowledge of my cycle.
This is very interesting, honestly. And I don't know a huge amount of, I mean, I've been hearing so much in the last year or two about follicular phase versus luteal phase and how to optimize your exercise and your eating and your essentially your well-being to your phases. Because again, this is not something we're taught. This was never part of, health education growing up. There's so much information that is out there, but so little that's actually taught. And at least for me, for example, I'm just slowly starting to scratch the surface of getting more in touch with my body and trying to understand, like, okay, where am I in my cycle? How is my body feeling? And it feels very counterintuitive about what I said before about the follicular phase being the time where we can do more high intensity training, because when I'm bleeding for a few days straight with massive cramps, getting like sometimes even migraines, and I have lower back pain, and like the whole world is just collapsing because everything is super negative because my hormones are plummeting. And do you know what I mean? Like, it's really hard to actually feel like, oh, this is the time I want to go and do CrossFit or something.
No, but honestly, so yesterday I got into the pool. I started off with like no expectations. I'm like, let's just get into the pool and let's try. And I did find that I could reserve like 45-minute time slots in my particular gym. And the week prior, I was like maxing out at about 20, 25 minutes and not putting any pressure on myself. I used nearly the whole 45 minutes of like lap time.
Wow.
I didn't actually realize that I had done that. I didn't even notice the clock. I was just like going through my paces. I did competitive swimming when I was a child. And so swimming was also something that I like essentially had to give up for the pursuit of having this ballet body, because I had a previous boss that once told me that like swimming changed my body in a way that was not conducive to looking like a pretty ballerina on stage. So that has its own trauma, but it's so mentally stabilizing and holistic for me as a human. Something about being a fire slide and getting into water. And yesterday, I was able to swim more than I have in current weeks, which I think that's an interesting sort of tidbit.
They say during the luteal phase to tread lightly. Your body is in prep mode, so it's not a great time to go hard on training, like switch up to low intensity workouts and listen to your body, be aware, eat up more if you need. And also it's the time during the luteal phase. So again, this is the second 2 weeks post cycle, post ovulation, right? Leading up to your next period, where it's also more difficult to stay hydrated. And this can also contribute to lower energy levels, right? If we're not drinking enough water, if we're not paying enough attention to that, that can also contribute. And as you're speaking about this, I'm thinking about the last couple days and over the weekend when I got my period, and I was walking like 3 or 4 hours a day. I was traveling somewhere and I was exploring. I ended up walking, I don't know, like 25,000 steps a day almost. And realizing now, thinking back to it, that I was in the very beginning of my period and I actually had more than enough energy to be able to handle going through that. Whereas, maybe a week ago or so, there were a few days where I was just vegged out on the sofa because I was just exhausted leading up. So I do think it's really interesting. And I do think it's important for female artists and female athletes and female dancers to at least research for themselves. If we're not given the possibility for this kind of information growing up, at least do the research for yourself to try and optimize. I, for one, am very curious to try and optimize more. I started kickboxing a year ago, and I will say that I do notice the difference in different weeks of my cycle. I've not paid attention to it, but I know that sometimes I have so much energy and sometimes I have absolutely no energy at all. And those will never fall in the same week.
Right.
And I'm eating the same thing. I'm going at the same time. The rest of my day, like the rest of the factors that go into that day, are pretty much the same. So it is something to be mindful of, I think.
I can't wait for the studies that are about to happen. I can't wait for all the wealth of knowledge that just like is at our fingertips. I love this collective embracing of the feminine and all that it is, and how we can improve upon the experience of being a menstruating human.
I couldn't agree more. I think we have so much power in our bodies and in our energy and in ourselves that we can use towards ourselves for good, towards others for good, towards our art for good. And, it's up to us to sort of do the research and find that optimization. And as you say, like, I'm so glad that the conversations are becoming more open, even for you and I to have this conversation, just even from a personal standpoint. I think a couple years ago, I wouldn't have even felt comfortable talking about it. And after 3 years of therapy, I'm like, let's bring it on.
Yeah, this is one's truth. And if there's anything that I've learned through the process of becoming an author and sharing my own personal story in such a very public form, is that your truth can help someone else find theirs, and how you don't necessarily have to know the dance world to resonate with some of the experiences that I've had. It's not just a female resonating experience. Humanity, we share a lot more than we do not. And so this is just one other way that we, as the menstruating group, can collectively experience and understand and grow. And kind of, I guess, circle back. I feel like a lot of our First Nation, Indigenous people inherently understood and respected this process. It was a slower time. And so, like, circling back to, like you said, this power that we have, this amazing ability and this interconnectedness to the solar system, the moon, and this divine ability to create life or not. And that the fact that, like, it comes with all of this is really, it's a fascinating deep dive into how we are shaped as individuals.
I love it.
If you let it.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Georgina. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. Thank you for being open to chatting about this. I hope we have many more conversations on this. And I hope the awareness of this topic becomes bigger and bigger with time. I hope there's less shame, less guilt, less embarrassment, less fear to have conversations about real topics, about things that are everyday, affect especially women every single day. So thank you for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to be open and honest.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page @ConsciousArtistPodcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength to tackle this week, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of The Conscious Artist.